Every century, every era, and each wave of feminism has brought diverse ideas, conflicts, and has been based on many divergent reasons. And in today's date, it might be unfeasible to agree with each possible belief that we find in the feminist literature or that of the former feminist. Because what women were advocating for earlier, their attempt to gain basic rights and just to have an identity to have their own words, it doesn't align with the rising conflicts today. And in this video, we will be talking about a feminist who was a feminist even before the concept of feminism was introduced. A figure who was controversial back in the days of her reign and still happens to be part of someone's debate, and for a few, her ideologies are their path. So Juana Ines de la Cruz, who is also known as the 10th Muse, was a 17th century Mexican nun who is still yet recognized for being the first published feminist of the Americas. Now, honestly, when I read some of her work initially, I didn't relate to certain ideas mentioned. But what made me read it further was the style she voiced it and how she challenged the patriarchy and the misogynistic patterns. But the writings today we read as a symbol of strength or the valiant effort were once the reason why she had to sign a statement of self-humiliation. She had begun writing in a time when women's role were heavily confined to the marriage, domestic life, or the convent, when women were expected to be obedient and silent. Aspiring for intellect was a domain solely reserved for men. And even in a century like that, not only she became a nun who studied philosophy and secular subject, but also opposed the male dominance and fought for the women's right. And let me also highlight that we are talking about a period when even in the convent, women were expected to follow only the religious method. But Juana was an outspoken woman in a society where men had the authority, and they considered her intellect to be inappropriate. In 1690, Sor Juana wrote a critique of Jesuit Antonio Vergara. She didn't write her interpretations but simply disagreed with Vergara's argument. Let's not forget to mention here that it was a private critique. But Manuel Fernandez de Santa Cruz, the Bishop of Puebla, obtained this critique and published it under a pseudonym, Sor Filotea de la Cruz, and that too without knowledge or permission of Sor Juana. He included a letter in it where he said where he initially appreciated her intellect and then later heavily criticized her for focusing on the secular subject and told her to switch her attention to the religious matters. And this was exactly where the entire controversy fueled up. Because then in 1691, Sor Juana, responding to the bishop, wrote her famous work, Respuesta Sor Filotea de la Cruz, in which she defended women's right to education and argued that the intellectual pursuits were not against her faith. But all of this resulted in pressure from her religious superiors. Ines de Miranda, her confessor, along with the Archbishop of Mexico, pressured her to respect and to comply with the traditional expectations from a nun. Being under intense pressure, she was forced to sell her voluminous library of 4,000 books. She had to renew her religious vows and even sign a statement of self-humiliation, calling herself I the worst of all. She then stopped writing and occupied herself with the charitable work until her death in 1695 from a plague.